Folks, thanks for tuning in again today at the start of a week, and welcome to new listeners in Canada and in the US. Appreciate the support, giving you headlines and items behind the headlines that you're not going to get from mainstream media. So thanks for tuning in. We've got some wild stuff to report today, including what could be one of the biggest hoaxes that was unintentionally done and completely taken in by Time magazine, something that was said by Canadians. So you got to tune in, stay with us for that. The weekend saw across the country all attention being on the province of Alberta, where the Conservative Party in Alberta, called the UCP, or the United Conservative Party, they had thousands of members turning out. It might have been a record in terms of attendance. And at that particular annual convention, what they do is the members themselves, these are the individual citizens, grassroots from across the province, get together, they propose different motions, they vote on them, and then those get handed to what in this case will be the government of Alberta. So amazing among these, and some very interesting items that got passed. This is going to get attention. There was a motion that public funding for third trimester abortions should stop. That is definitely getting attention. Now, the government does not have to accept these motions, but the government is going to have to explain, if they don't accept them, why they don't. So there is some understandable shock, I guess you could say it, coming from mainstream media that this actually took place. When you take a step back and you look across the spectrum in Canada and in the US, when it comes to the issue of third-term abortions, third trimester, now keep in mind most Canadians, just like most Americans, whether we like it or not in the polls, do support abortion, the woman's right to have an abortion. However, most, even those who are ardent supporters of a woman's right to choose, as they call it, still say they don't like the late term, the third trimester abortions. So overall across the country, there will be some support for that particular motion. Mainstream media, of course, will get quite hyper on this and quite strident, and I'm sure there'll be all kinds of name calling going on. But in fact, that motion that was passed by the membership in Alberta is reflected by a majority of Canadians across the country, at least when it comes to third term trimester. Some other items that were picked up on and voted on and even spoken on, the Premier of the province, Danielle Smith, who has quite a reputation for being very clear and opposed to massive oversized government and government telling people what to do, and her government in the province of Alberta takes that quite seriously. She has made a statement that she will not, as a matter of fact, she will be instructing Alberta policing and Alberta authorities not to be involved in any way with the federal Liberal program of confiscating firearms. This is a ramped up program by the Liberals, where in the views of many, especially those in Western Canada, the focus is wrong. There's going to be a ban and a picking up of certain types of firearms, mainly long arms, long rifles, which in fact are not used hardly at all in crime sometimes, but a tiny percentage. Majority of crime deaths to firearms is handguns in cities like Toronto. And the feeling, certainly in Alberta and other parts of the country, is that the government, the Liberals, are completely wrong-headed on this, going after what they say are the innocent farmers and hunters and sport shooters. And Premier Smith feels so strong about this, as do most Albertans, that they're not going to be involved in any way in confiscating firearms. Of course, if they are used illegally in a crime, that's a different situation. So she has also said, and underlining the fact that on home invasions, that Albertans have a right to do what they need to do to prevent home invasion. She took a quote from probably coming from the US, saying, look, if you don't want to get shot, don't invade somebody's home. So she's taking much more of a citizen-focused approach to that. That's definitely getting attention and going to get more attention. Well, we're on day 5 of what people were calling a real breakthrough in the thinking of the governing party, the Liberal Party federally in Canada, and Prime Minister Carney, who seemed to be saying, look, we're going to drop some of these environmental regulations that don't make any sense anyway and that will not in any way reduce emissions, and we're going to work, this is what the federal government said, to see that another pipeline can be built to get much needed, globally much needed oil and gas products to the coast and then off the coast to areas and nations like China, which continues to burn huge amounts of coal, countries like India, which burns a significant amount of quite literally cow dung to heat their homes and cook their food, and oil and gas products from Canada, which could break the stranglehold that Putin has on the European nations who are forced to buy his energy products, his oil and gas products, just to create electricity and energy and home heating, especially in the winter in Europe. This would go a long way, getting more of Canada's, more of Alberta's refined oil and gas products, and actually would reduce emissions. But it is definitely appearing to be stalled again, because even though the Premier of British Columbia, Premier Eby, has said, well, okay, we'll look at it, but the tanker ban has to stay in place, banning oil tankers of anything that carries over 12,500 is the amount in terms of the total volume of oil and gas products that can be transported. And banks, however, are saying, the lead banks being interviewed, saying because of the indecisive nature of how can you, what are you going to do with a pipeline that can't ship the way they want to in terms of tankers, it's going to be a problem. First Nations are very dug in, or so they say they are, and we will see if Canada continues to be stuck economically and environmentally and not helping other nations because of this ban. But right now, it's not looking that great, as we hear from financiers that no large company is going to be investing with this level of indecision. That might then force the federal government to do what the Liberal federal governments love to do, and that's to take taxpayers' money and get involved in business, which is never a good idea. That has resulted in certainly one pipeline that has been built, but after years and years and huge costs, and it minimizes the positive impacts to any of the Canadian economy. It certainly doesn't help First Nations groups. So it seems that things are still kind of tied up. The other thing that was noticed from the federal budget, and this is kind of a first time in years, at least since 2015, the federal Liberal government has declared there's going to be a slight reduction in terms of foreign aid that goes out, especially on health-related issues. This stems from the fact that in 2015, when the former Prime Minister was elected as the Liberal leader of government, he announced a policy of saying he was feminizing. There's going to take a feminist approach to foreign aid spending. Nobody was quite sure what that meant, but the budget shows that millions and millions of dollars have gone into some pretty strange programs of foreign aid, and just recently come to light, and how you would get this is baffling most Canadians. But the certain agriculture support programs, for instance, one to Vietnam, where they want to make agriculture free to and available agricultural products on a gender basis, a gender transition basis. Very strange language, but they have managed to encourage other countries to develop policies that are related to transgender when it comes to things like agriculture. It's just created a whole lot of confusion, and part of the reason that the federal Liberals, I'll say to their credit, has backed off on some of this multi-million-dollar spending under that so-called guise of feminization, because nobody really knows what it means. They're going to get it defined. It may go back up, but we'll see. Canadian universities are really suffering financially. The numbers have just recently come out, and they're hurting badly. Many universities are closing down certain departments and closing down some of their own activities. And the reason they're doing that, one of the principal reasons, is because the federal Liberal government last year did a severe reduction in terms of denying international students the numbers to come to Canada. The reduction has been quite significant. In the year the reduction was announced, 306,000 foreign students were coming into the country benefiting from Canadian universities, and that's been reduced to 155,000. So it's cut easily in half. Why that's such a big impact on universities is not just in terms of enrollment, but Canadian universities actually survive to a degree and make some of the money they need, because they can charge up to double or even more for foreign students coming in, and foreign students are quite willing to pay it. And the federal Liberal government, whose policies have really messed up the development and the building of houses, because it is so over-regulated and so overtaxed and so difficult for either developers or individuals to build in any kind of timely way, and with the huge layer of costs, that was affecting and still affects housing more than anything. And here the federal Liberals were trying to say it was all these foreign students. I can tell you the vast majority of foreign students were not buying homes, were not crowding Canadians out of home markets, and they were providing incentive for companies to build more rental housing. That pipeline has been cut off by the federal Liberals, and universities really starting to hurt from that. Maybe it's time the federal Liberals rethought that policy. In terms of housing policy, the City of Toronto is completely cratering on their condo development, again, for some of the reasons that I just stated. And just this year so far, it's noted that 35,000 families, this is an individual, that's 35,000 families, have left the City of Toronto as a designated municipal area. They've departed, and they say the reasons are the high costs and that there is not enough being done to reduce visible street crime. And they talk about the usual things that we hear about across the country, the encampments that develop, people living on the street, crime on the street, and moms talking about in the City of Toronto walking their kids to school, and in some areas, some parks stepping over needles and other paraphernalia. When a city government, and this would be the government under Mayor Chow, appears to be more focused on what we would call woke issues than waking up to some of the real issues, then those cities are going to lose people. That means they're going to lose taxes. The problem is going to get worse. In cities like that, folks, you just got to give your heads a shake. If you want to see these problems getting worse, then keep voting for liberally oriented leftist governments. If you want to see the problems go away and more prosperity and more peace coming to cities, then vote for center or center-right individuals who approach these problems differently. Just keep an eye on that. Talking about keeping an eye on things, we're all well aware that the US has taken a policy against Venezuela. They're taking a very serious stand on the massive shipments of drugs coming into the country, and we're quite aware of the attack on the Venezuela boats. Now, I said some time ago, it's just going to be a matter of time until the narco-terrorists in Venezuela get smart and they put some kids on one of these boats or a baby on one of these boats, so that deliberately, because terrorists have no problem in doing this, they love to see when kids get killed by the opposing force, then that goes completely wild on mainstream media and creates all kind of pressure. So I had said for a while, this is just going to be a matter of time. So now we have close-ups, and it really is not pretty to watch, where one of these Venezuelan drug boats was hit on a missile attack from US aircraft, and it shows that there were a couple survivors after the first hit, and it shows a couple people clinging to some of the wreckage of the boat and then getting hit again. And those photos are going viral. That's understandable that those photos would. I would only say this: it would be interesting and probably more responsible if mainstream media would show some of the close-up survival photos of people, especially young people, on the streets of the United States who are dying painfully from the effects of drug addiction. 105,000 people is one of the figures from US sources. 105,000 young people per year dying of drug overdoses, and these are in many cases very painful deaths. So you can see, and you can agree or not, but the policy from the US is they are being invaded, their country's being invaded by vicious and lethal drugs, and they've warned the Venezuelan drug lords to stop this or they're going to get evaporated at sea, and that's what's been happening. So it would be helpful, I believe, for people in considering whether this particular approach of bombing the drug boats works. Show some of the reasons for it. Show some of the kids dying in the streets, 105,000 of them last year. Maybe we'll get a little different perspective on it, maybe not. In terms of media itself, the latest stat coming out from a group called the News Literacy Project, and they are saying now that the cohort of people, this would be approximately 15 to 35-year-olds, that distrust the media and say that they think most or a lot of media is fake. They have terrible names, the names that they're addressing for mainstream media. It's now 84% of that age cohort will not even watch mainstream media news because they think it's full of all kinds of misleading items, even lies, and they're getting their news from TikTok. It's just the reality, folks. Something mainstream media might want to think about. China, in terms of technological advancement, and there's a huge argument and debate going on, is China really pulling ahead of us in areas of technology? There's some interesting discussion going on with that. One of the things in the city, not just of Shenzhen, but there's a report from the city of Shenzhen. I've been to that city. It's an amazing place to see. It's now absolutely commonplace. Food delivery by drone is absolutely commonplace. Now, whether those drones fly in your window and drop it right at your table, I don't know, but they're way ahead of the rest of the world in terms of that particular economic activity. And they say now they have developed and are ready in 20 cities in China, that it's just a matter really of months, not even years, until drone taxis, unmanned drone these are little flying taxis will come and pick you up and fly you to your destination. This is not stuff looking out way in the future. It's about to be happening. China pulling ahead, no question about it, in some areas at least when it comes to technology. We talked about, I just talked about the fact that people distrust mainstream media. This is a hilarious story here, and Canadians are kind of smiling with glee about this. In Canada, there's a satirical parody magazine called The Beaverton. They're pretty funny. They got some pretty funny stuff. Beaverton, for our American friends, that's a reflection on a couple of things. But beaver being a Canadian symbol, and Beaverton having some past literary accomplishments. But anyway, the magazine's called The Beaverton. And over 2 months ago, they published a story that the US ambassador to Canada was saying that, one thing that might make Canadians smarten up in terms of our feeling towards Americans is maybe a Patriot missile strike on the Parliament buildings. Now, this was reported, that this was in part of the parody, part of the satire from Beaverton magazine. Beaverton magazine is very clear. When you look at what they say about what they do, they say we are satire. Any coincidence or statements coming from what might be a political figure is purely coincidental. We are a satire parody magazine. Well, Time magazine didn't think so. 2 months ago, they published it as fact that the US ambassador to Canada was indeed commenting about future or imminent US policy, which would be hitting the Canadian Parliament buildings with a Patriot missile. And Time magazine reported it as absolute fact. Not only that, it went uncorrected in Time magazine for about 2 months. That story stayed out there, so millions of people would have read that in Time magazine. And the lack of reaction to it is surprising. Now, one speculative idea here is other mainstream media not reporting Time's goof that broadly is because it shows that really how much can you trust mainstream media when an organization like Time doesn't even do the fact checking. Matter of fact, it's being suggested they just use some AI bots to do the fact checking on that. But when Time magazine of something of that nature, a threatened attack on an ally, goes unaddressed, maybe that's part of the reason 84% of young people and an increasing number of older people are steering away from mainstream media. So Time magazine taking a real hit there. Well, in the US, they've just finished the Thanksgiving season, and of course, all in the news, they bring in the Christmas season earlier than most other countries do, and that always starts each year with a tour of the White House and how it's been decorated. Melania Trump getting lots of attention, most of it positive actually, in terms of the amazing decorative approach she's done to the White House this year. And her theme is, and nobody's really criticizing it because you can't deny it, but her theme is home is where the heart is. Home is where the heart is. And believe me, these type of themes from the First Lady, they take a lot of thought. They don't just come up with these themes, and really the reflection there, probably something for all of us to reflect on, that the heart of the matter, folks, the heart of the matter really stems from the home. And it hasn't been since President Obama that we've seen such a focus on the home and what happens in the home. And you remember Barack Obama said on a number of occasions in looking at some of the huge youth crime problems in the US, certainly in low-income neighborhoods. And he said, in terms of the black community, he said the biggest problem, the biggest challenge is, and he was quite clear on this, absentee fathers. Absentee fathers. As I've said before on this broadcast, that's not just within the black community where you have a problem. Any community that has absentee fathers, whether they've just left or whether their work takes them away from home and they're never there or not to the degree they should be, it's a bit of a problem. Think about that as we approach Christmas time, and whether we support the spiritual aspect of it, the biblical aspect, but home is where the heart is, folks. Spend some time with family, not just now, but in the coming weeks. And thanks for tuning in. See you tomorrow.